cool with me.
All right, let's get this going, man. We've got an interview with a great legend on the phone. He's one of the most prominent singers, composers, songwriters, and producers in South Africa.
He's a multiple award-winning film and television soundtrack composer, songwriter, and musician. He's remained active in his studio, working on various film and television projects and albums with local and international musicians. We are concentrating on his work from the 1980s and the early 90s, more or less, with his band, The Passengers, who I have a big interest in. The Passengers did tour Scotland and England, from what I know. And I would like to know, Neil, first of all, how's your day going? And thank you for being here.
All good. Thanks, Derek. Thanks. Day's winding down now. It's 8 p.m. here in Johannesburg. So, yeah, all good. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much for making the time. I've been looking forward to this. I know you had a band called Bizarre, correct?
I actually had a band before Bizarre. The one that really took off in 81 was a band called NEILL SOLOMON and the Uptown Rhythm Dogs. And we did an album called The Occupant, which is kind of regarded as a South African rock classic album. And then after that, I went to the UK actually to sell that album. And I got to London and I got a meeting top floor with Warner Brothers Records, and I was really excited. In those days, it was vinyls, and I got to the top floor, and the head of Warner Brothers Records in London pulled out the record, and he played the whole track, the whole album, and he said, "I love it. I want to sign your album. I want to release it." And then he said, "So what part of Australia are you from?" And I said, "No, I'm from South Africa." And, with apartheid happening, it was like a wall came down, and he said, "We don't deal with South Africans and the dreadful apartheid policy. Don't blame the man at all. But it was a real bad bummer for us, as a band." So then Bizarre came after that, which George Spencer was a very active part. George Spencer, who was in the Rollers, and that was the Rollers link. So George played percussion and vibes in that band, vibraphone, and then after Bizarre, I went into theatre and was acting in shows and doing music for theatre, and then we formed The Passengers.
Okay, and how did you get Stewart Wood from the Rollers and Carew and stuff into the band? How did that happen?
So I had moved back to Durban, which is hometown Durban, which is where George Spencer comes from. They call it Surf City. And I was working in theatre, and I decided to go back to Johannesburg and form a new band, and I decided to call it The Passengers. I'd gotten back to Johannesburg, and I'd got a couple of the guys who were in Bizarre with me, I think, if I remember correctly. And then I got a call from George saying, "Listen, I want to come home, and I'm with Woody and Ian from the Bay City Rollers, and we've got nothing happening here. We're coming to join your band." So I said, "Okay, cool." We were playing at a venue, I think it was called the Ox Box. It was around early 80s. I can't remember. No, 90s, late 80s. And sorry, memory is not great. And the three of them arrived, and they walked in and set up, and I think we performed that evening at this venue as a 7-piece band instead of a 4-piece band. So that's when The Passengers really became a band. I had just started The Passengers. So it was literally like we formed the band together,
Wow, that's very intriguing. And, this is something that I can't wait to find out the answer, because I don't know. How and was Ian Mitchell in the band for a short time?
Ian was. He came out with Woody and George. And he was in the band for some time, a good couple of, say, months, I won't say years. And we toured South Africa We did shows in quite a few places. In those days, in South Africa music scene, clubs had a thing called a 3-month residency where the bands would go and set up and play in the same club for like 3 months, and you'd be employed, like paid a salary, you know. And I remember we did one in Durban. We went back to Durban with Woody and Ian, and we did one at a place called the Empress Hotel, and we all lived on the top floor. And then I remember, I think Ian decided not too much was happening for him, and he went back to London, I think. So Woody stayed on much longer, much longer. When we split as the Passengers, George and Woody formed a band with a guy who was in our band, a keyboard player, and they formed a band called Beat the Clock. So Ian had left by then.
Okay, and wasn't there a band that Woody was in called The Bond? Does that have anything to do with any of this?
Called The
Bond?
Not to do with our circle, no. Because Woody and them formed Beat the Clock, and then they broke up. Or Woody did phone me one day and said, listen, I'm out of this band. I'm coming back and let's do something. And so we formed a duo, and we performed a lot of original music and cover versions with a computer on stage. And Woody and I did that for quite a while.
Wonderful. I'd never heard about any of that or Beat the Clock, so that's news to me.
Yeah, they did an album as well, and they did a cover of a classic South African song called Master Jack, which was written by a classic South African songwriter, and he was a miner, and he wrote it underground in one of the mines here in outside Johannesburg. And it was recorded, became a #1 in America as well, or went very high on the Billboard charts by some other artists. And they did a great version of that song.
Wild. So Woody is on the Beat the Clock album, huh?
He's on the Beat the Clock album. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Have you ever considered doing a reunion with the Passengers by way? Have you thought about that?
You know, I've been asked by these sort of wealthy businessmen who are nostalgic and want to indulge themselves and want to throw a lot of money at us, and then they come with these offers, and other people have asked us. I'm not really a nostalgia person, you know. It's kind of been there, done that, and move on. And there's so many current projects going and producing and other stuff. I'm busy on a new album, a new NEILL SOLOMON album, which I haven't done for many years. So I'm busy with that. But we would. The only thing is that we were musically the musicianship of the guys was very technical and very, very up there. And I know George would say, I don't know if he would probably say, I'm not sure if I can play that kind of stuff anymore, you know, because he doesn't play every day. But I'm sure George would do it. And then there's Chris Becker, who was our incredible bass player, who moved to Australia 25 years ago. And he's one of the top session musicians in Australia, plays with a lot of the big names. The keyboard player is a guy called Gabby LaRue, who went on to become a top producer. He still is. And he wrote a song with a South African. We have South African music. African music has a lot of different genres, and the current one at the moment is called Amapiano, which I've actually recently done an album with some South African DJs of Amapiano music for KPM Production Music Library in London. But a pre-runner to Amapiano music was Kwaito, and there was a huge artist that Gabby produced. And they wrote a song called Ngalagata, which became a #1 hit all over. And it gets played in stadiums at all these football games and rugby games and all that. So Gabby is still around. I'm sure he would play. And then there's Woody, and I haven't got much contact with Woody. Not too often, just on email and stuff like that. But I'm sure he would buy into it. So yeah, there's always a chance that we may. I should set up a reunion. What do you think?
I would think it would be a complete sellout and everyone would love it. Yeah.
I think it'll be fun.
A lot of fun and a beautiful musical experience. Can I ask about the Gravy Train album? How come that was unreleased? That was recorded in '87, I believe, and I don't think it was released like Rule of the Swallow was.
No, Rule of the Swallow was a commercial album. Gravy Train, in South Africa, there's the biggest broadcasting corporation is called SABC, South African Broadcasting Corporation. And in the 80s and 90s, they used to commission albums. So they'd pay a band or an artist to come into their beautiful studios and record the album. And then they paid for it, which then gave them the access to use that music on any of their programs, from sports programs to health programs to television series. So it was quite a clever way of getting around copyright laws and owning the copyright, and so they could exploit the music, And for us musicians who needed money, it was a great way to go and document your tracks and all that. So that's why Gravy Train was never released commercially until recently. We released it commercially. It's funny how things go around, because a guy that signed me with the Uptown Rhythm Dogs, he was with Weir Records, which was a subsidiary of Warner Brothers, Benji Moody. Last year sometime he called and said, "Do you have a copy of Gravy Train?" So I said, "No, I've only got a vinyl, and I would love to find a copy of Gravy Train, a good quality recording, and to release it commercially." And he said, "Well, I was given a copy of a CD straight off the 2-track, the multi-track recording, the 2-inch tape, and he sent it to me, and that's why we released it online,
Wow, so that's available digitally, but not physically.
Not physically. I mean, I've thought about doing some limited edition vinyls, but the vinyl plants that were so active in South Africa, when vinyl stopped selling, they sold the plants to Eastern Europe, I think. So now if we want vinyl done in South Africa, we have to go to Europe, and it's so costly to get vinyls made, the covers printed, then the shipping costs. By the time we get it here, it's an absolute fortune, and people just won't be able to afford them, And
yeah, I understand. Running a small record label myself, I totally can relate to everything you just said, and it's a big deal. It's really hard to figure out. It's a thin, fine line between getting the music to people and people going broke.
Absolutely.
Have you ever considered writing a book?
Well, they say everyone's got a book in them, and I always think my story is not there's not enough to tell. But then somebody the other day said to me, "You've got to write this book." Yeah. So maybe it's on the cards. At the moment, maybe time is limited, but when I slow down, I'm busy. I also do art and stuff. So I've written a sound installation for an art gallery, and I've got a whole lot of paintings and stuff that we're planning to do an exhibition in September.
Yeah, I was reading your bio that was sent over to me, and I was blown away by the amount of work you've done and continue to do. And I'm kudos to you. I have much respect for you. Can I ask, back on the passenger subject? Sorry to be like a broken record.
No.
How many gigs did the Passengers play in your time of being a band? Would you have any idea?
Derek, with my memory, I couldn't tell you, but we played a lot. I mean, during the time of the Passengers, we really survived out of live gigs. So all I can say is for the years that we were going, we literally played 6 nights a week.
Wow.
We probably had one day off a week if we did, and we played club after club after club around South Africa. We then moved to Woody, of course, because of Woody. He said, listen, let's give it a try in Scotland. We packed up, the 6 of us, we went and we found this place. Woody and George stayed at Woody's place, his folks' place, which was great for them. The other 4 of us, Greg Georgiadis was on guitar at the time as well, and Woody was on keyboards in those days. Greg is a well-known South African musician. He plays a lot of stringed instruments, and he and I grew up together. My dad was his godfather, so we met when we were like 3 months old, and we went through school together before our family moved to Durban and left him in a city called Pretoria. So Greg was in the band as well, Chris Becker on bass, and Ian was still with us. Ian was with us in Scotland. And then, so we stayed in a converted coal room in Princess Street, next to what was it called? The Cathedral in Edinburgh, the big, well-known cathedral in Edinburgh. So we lived in this coal room downstairs, this freezing coal room, where there were communal bathrooms upstairs, and every morning you'd have to go up 2 flights of stairs to the bathroom and wear flip-flops because there were heroin needles on the floor. And so it was a year of interesting stuff, and it was great, except that the venues we played, it was always billed the Passengers, ex-Bay City Rollers, and everybody who came to these gigs all over Scotland were expecting to hear Shangalang or whatever their big hits were. And we were playing this really out there for those people's ears, out there kind of rock, jazz, funk, folk. I don't know what it was, but it was not, they didn't appreciate it. I don't think they liked Woody and Ian for that too much, you know.
That's wild. Yeah, a lot of people seem to have missed. A lot of people don't know about the Passengers, and when I bring it up, they're like, "What is that?" I'm like, "Wow, that's what made me want to I need to get a hold of Neill Solomon and maybe just do a short interview and maybe bring some light to some of the history of the music." And I don't have a lot of time, but I have a couple more questions for you, Neill.
Sure.
When you were over in Scotland, did you ever happen to run in or get a chance to meet my buddy Pat McGlynn by chance? Another ex-roller.
I didn't meet any of them, if I remember correctly. Oh no, I lie. We met Alan and Derek.
Okay.
Because we went and played in Stirling, which is where they came from. And,
absolutely.
And they came and had a drink before one of our gigs, if I remember correctly.
Wild.
I didn't meet Pat. I didn't meet Les. I didn't meet the others.
Okay. And another question, a little bit jumping back to South Africa. Were you friends, or were you a fan or associated at all in any way with Duncan Fora or the band Rabbit?
I know Duncan well. We get on well. We were never big mates. But yeah, Duncan and I go back a long way. I think we did something together just briefly, and he came and played at the same club and we jammed and all that. But I know Duncan from those days. When Rabbit were in their heyday, I was great friends. That was when I still was starting out in music, really. I was good friends with their bass player, Ronnie Robot. More so than the other 3 of the guys, you know. And
yeah,
now I'm really good friends with the drummer, Neil Cloud. He lives in the area. He's a very rich man who took over his father's office furniture business. But after Rabbit, Neil went and did a huge American tour as the drummer of Peter Frampton, when he was touring Frampton Comes Alive.
Wow, that was Neil?
Yeah, and then Neil just came back to SA, and and just went into the family business, and that was that. And we recently saw him at our local Italian restaurant, and he was like, come on, man, let's jam, let's get something together. But I know now that I know Trevor doesn't want to be involved, but I know that Duncan, Neil, and Ronnie are trying to do a South African reunion tour of Rabbit later this year.
Yeah, I was trying to reach out and somehow get an interview with either Neil or Ronnie, so I'm hoping to have that happen still. I'm kind of running out of time. Have
you got Neil's details?
I do not. I would love to be able to reach him somehow.
I'll send you a number.
You're the best. I appreciate it. You're one of those guys that I could talk to for hours. You have so much to say, and there's a lot that I haven't even touched upon, to be very honest. I have a list here. Is there any chance that you and I could talk another interview down the road?
Let's do a part 2.
Oh, that'd be cool. I like to do those once in a while, and with you, absolutely.
Can I ask you one question?
Please do.
Where can I hear your music?
Well, just to keep it short, I'm a 39-year mostly punk rock and roll veteran, but I've done some blues and country stuff and some pop stuff along the way. Most of it's on YouTube, and what I'll do is I'll send over a couple links for you, some of the what I consider my better things.
Cool. I'm more interested in the punk.
Really interesting. Yeah, my friend Pat McGlynn is also into punk rock and likes it and appreciates it. So I'm very surprised to hear another a hero of mine that's into punk rock. That's cool. Thanks.
Cool. Great. Thanks, man.
Yeah, I'm so honored. Neil, I'm also honored to have you on the phone today, and thanks a million for making the time for the listeners more than anybody, but for me too. And I'll talk to you offline about scheduling a part 2, and I going to play some music right now by the Passengers, and maybe next time around we can play something more current that you picked that's newer from you.
I'll give you one of my new tracks, which is off the unreleased album.
Yeah, fair enough. Right now I'm going to do the track that George Spencer programmed. It was track number 7 from the, I believe, Rule of the Swallow album. It's called Got to Get Away.
Okay, brilliant. Cool, man. Thank you.
And that was actually a single. This was released in 1988. It's the Passengers with Got to Get Away. Neil, thanks a million. I really appreciate talking to you.
Thanks, Derek. You too. It's been great. Thank you.
NEILL Solomon, everyone. It is the Passengers right here at the Almighty Church of Rock and KSKQ Community Radio.